everyone to do the Logitech shuffle. So that means if there is an empty seat next to you, move towards the middle. That will make some room for the people coming in right now on the ends.
Well, that's news
Thank
to me.
you.
I never heard the Logitech shuffle. Okay, while you're shuffling, I'm gonna introduce Robbie a little bit, but I'm gonna let Robbie introduce himself. I want to start by just putting this in context. How many people have been here more than a year? Great. How many people have been here less than a year? I see you. Okay. So the impetus for these all these speakers that Jessica has taken over and just run with is really to try to give everybody here exposure to lots of different things. Some of them are practical, like you can walk away and do something with it, like self-help kind of things. Some of them are business-oriented. Wow, that's really interesting. Might be able to apply to our business. Some of them are personal. You know, we had, those of you who remember, I had a doctor come in and talk about cancer screening, a guy named George Sawaya, who's one of the top cancer screening specialists in the world. We had Jackie Joyner-Kersee come in, and she talked about being Jackie Joyner-Kersee, which is like fun to be. And we had Mike Cassidy, who came from Google most recently. He's running Project Loon, which floats the balloons, you know, to create connectedness into all these places that wouldn't have it if they didn't do balloons. And so really, this is really all about you, and it's not really about the company, the logo on the wall. It's really about you as individuals. And I always try to hustle everybody into these things because I always think they're so good and so important. But you know, it's always a choice, and I'm glad you took the choice today, because Robbie Bach is a very interesting guy. You know, he grew up in what used to be kind of our biggest partner and biggest competitor. And now I would say they're just our biggest partner. I stopped thinking of Microsoft as a competitor, not because they don't compete with us, they do, but because they're so important for us as partners. You know, without them, we would literally exist. Satya, I'm joining from Microsoft. Now, Robbie is no longer with Microsoft. He's now a consultant, and he speaks. He's written a book. He's a very interesting guy, and he ran the entertainment devices business, devices business for Microsoft. So we are really, really lucky to have him here, and I'm really, really thankful that all of you came. So, Robbie, I'm going to hand it off to you.
That's great. Thank you, Brecken. Appreciate it. And I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you.
So I'm going to do a quick introduction, but before I do that, I really like this to be interactive. So I have topics to discuss. I can talk for as long as you allow me to, but I would prefer as we go along, if you have questions, things you want to know about, things that don't make sense, you want to make some comment about Microsoft's mice or keyboards, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll do some discussion as we go along, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end as well. So thank you, Brecken, for inviting me and for the introduction, and thank you for putting this all together. I'm going to talk about 3 different things today. I'm going to talk about strategy, I'm going to talk about innovation, and I'm going to talk about civic engineering. So those are today's topics. By way of background, I grew up in Microsoft. I went to business school up the road at Stanford, or across the bridge at Stanford. Went to Microsoft for business school, worked at Microsoft for 22 years. I was the head of marketing for Microsoft Office when it was just getting going. I did that for about 5.5 years. I worked in Europe for a few years for Microsoft. And then I got involved in the PC gaming business, which led to me getting involved and running the Xbox business as Microsoft's chief Xbox officer and the founder of that business. And then I got involved in Microsoft's broader hardware and entertainment initiatives. And when I left, I was the president of the entertainment devices division of Microsoft. Since then, I've been doing a lot of board work, a little bit of consulting. I wrote a book, which some of you have here, called Xbox Revisited. I'm going to talk about some of the content of that today. And I'm also very involved in civic issues and nonprofit and philanthropy work. And I'm going to talk about that at the end. So let me dive into first topic, strategy. And to do that, I'm going to tell a little bit of the Xbox story. And Xbox got started as a business in 1999 at an executive staff retreat. And the idea was proposed, should Microsoft do a video game console? We had a small group of people that went off at the staff retreat and thought about it. Bill Gates was in that group. He went back, did a bunch of technical reviews, came back and said, hey, I think this is technically interesting. He asked some business people like me and a guy named Rick Thompson to figure out if there was a business. And by the end of the year, Microsoft had approved the Xbox project. So that whole process took only about 6 months. I will tell you that what got approved was truly crazy. And, you know, in any business school context, you know, the professor would be scratching his head saying, hey, you did what? So basically what we approved was a plan to go compete with Nintendo and Sony that required us to do the most powerful video game console ever and to do it from start to finish with 20 people in 18 months. Which meant, for those of you who do hardware, that means you had to do the hardware in about 10 or 11 months. And then it had to get through all the manufacturing and all the other parts of the process to get done. And so we started with 20 people, and in 18 months we had 2,000 people. And we built that Xbox project in what I would tell you was the most painful 18 months of my life. It was painful for a lot of different reasons, but the primary one is because we really didn't have a strategy for what we were trying to accomplish. Basically, our strategy was ship the damn thing on time and make sure the explosions look great. And that was about it. And everything else was secondary. And so every day you came into the office and you said, okay, what's the fire drill for today? I better go fix that. Literally to the point where one night I was at home at midnight with 100 DVDs testing the DVD drive in my living room. Because that was today's task, was we needed more testing on the DVD drive. So this was not a orchestrated effort. Now, I will tell you the team was incredibly good. It was an all-star team from a talent perspective. The engineering team was fabulous. We had some people from the gaming business. We had some people from Microsoft Systems Group who were really good at software. We had great tools folks. We had some good PC games guys who came over to do games. We bought Bungie, which was working on Halo. It was a really good team, but it was also like managing the United Nations because we had about 6 different cultures in the group, and I wasn't strong enough as a leader to force that into one culture. And so every day was, as I said, sort of a firefight on the day's problems in an environment where people didn't work the same way. Really, really challenging. And what that comes back to in the heart is that strategy and culture go hand in hand and are central to what you have to do if you want to get any project done. And I learned the importance of strategy and culture, despite the fact that I'd been to business school and worked at Microsoft for 12 years at that point. I learned it the hard way through the pain of that first version of the Xbox. Now, you might say, well, Robbie, that's all very interesting. I'm sorry you had 18 months of pain, but the project was successful. And in a way, you'd say, well, maybe it was. So let's look at the numbers. Market share, the original version of Xbox, remember the big black one with the controller that you had to have 3 hands to hold on to, was a pretty beastly machine. That product sold 23 million units worldwide over 4.5 years. Market share in most markets not called Japan was about between 20 and 25%. In Japan, we miraculously for 3 years managed to have negative market share. That's a really interesting thing. If you want to talk about that, I'm happy to explain the math on how that works. It's something about selling a lot in the first 2 weeks and then taking returns for 3 years. That's how that math works. But so from a market share perspective, you'd say 18 months, start to finish, never done something this complicated, in the marketplace, 20 to 25% market share, everybody celebrates, right? Okay, now the business plan. The original business plan for the first version of Xbox was to lose. This was the plan, was to lose $1.8 to $2 billion. That was the plan. We overachieved on the plan. In the first 5 years, in that first 5 years of the original Xbox, we lost, depending on how you deal with intercompany transfers of cost and some other things, someplace between $5 and $7 billion. All right, so as a person who actually went to business school, that is cataclysmically painful and really quite shocking. And in most places, in most companies, and certainly in any public company, I would have been fired. No question. And probably most of the management team with me, there would have been a cleansing. The project would have been canceled and the world would have moved on. But that's not the way Microsoft sort of worked. And the company's view was, we're investing for the long term, and you guys now have a bunch of learning, so fix it. Do it right. And this is where I come back to the thing I talked about at the beginning about culture and strategy. So we went, what do you do when you have a real problem and the team's not working well? There's one thing you always do. You always go and have an offsite. So we went and had an offsite, took the management team about 20 miles outside of Seattle, and for 3 days sat and argued with each other about what we were going to do about the future of Xbox. Because the Silicon team was already asking us for direction for a project that was going to ship 3 or 4 years from now. And we had no strategy and no direction. And we came up with a process, which I talk about at great length in the book, called the 3P framework. And basically, we challenged ourselves and we said, if we're going to do this right, we're going to write in 3 pages everything the team needs to know to get started and make decisions about the project. And in those 3 pages, we're going to tell them what the purpose of this next generation product is. We're going to tell them what the principles are under which we're going to work. And we're going to tell them the priorities of things that have to get done. And it has to be written in 3 pages. Now, I wrote the original draft of that 3-page document. If you go and try to do that, it's really, really hard. Try to say in 1 sentence, that's English with no semicolons, ands, buts, ors, and a bunch of connectors and dashes. Try to say in 1 sentence exactly what you're trying to accomplish. What is the specific North Star for what you're trying to do? Actually turns out to be really hard. I'll give you a couple of good examples. Microsoft had a statement that went along these lines. It was a computer on every desk and in every home running Microsoft software. Bill Gates and Paul Allen wrote that in 1975. That's a purpose statement. That goes at the top of a 3-page document that says what we're going to accomplish and how we're going to do it. More current example, I'm on the board at somebody who is a bit of a competitor for you guys, Sonos. And if Sonos had a purpose statement, it would be all the world's music in every room in your house. Simple statement, provides clear direction, gives the team a North Star for where they're going. So in this 3-page world you live in, and that I live in when I think about strategy, I try to say, okay, can you write that purpose statement? And you'd be shocked at the number of existing businesses, some even successful, where you say, what's your purpose? And you ask 4 people on the management team and you get 4 different answers. And that's how culture goes like this, rather than coming together like this. First point. Second part, principles. So it turns out that if you want to bring people together, you have to help them understand how to work. You have to agree on a set of decision-making principles, team principles, how we're going to work together, how we're going to manage the business. And in my world, you only get 5 principles to do what you're doing, not 10. So if you have a long list of 10 things that are good, that's very good for the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, but it's not very good for business because it's too many things. You got to come up with 5 principles that are how you're going to run and manage the business and lead the team and make decisions. And sitting down as a management team and forcing us ourselves to write those out and argue about those was incredibly clarifying. And it forced people to really think about how we were working together and how we were going to make decisions and how we were going to make sure we didn't lose $5 to $7 billion again, but in fact make $5 to $7 billion. And in that process, we had one person who worked for me and some other people in the team who left because they said the principles you're agreeing on aren't the way I want to work, aren't the way I want to run the business. And that's not a bad thing. It's hard, it's painful. But people who think differently and want to work in a different way, who have a different idea of what the purpose is, or a different way of thinking about team, or a different way of managing the P&L, you know, if they're a senior leader, they got to be on board. You can't have sort of people half on the bus and half off the bus. And so we use that principle process to drive the team together. And instead of having 6 cultures in Xbox and being the United Nations of Xbox, we became Team Xbox over that time. So, purpose, principles. And the last thing in this 3-pager is priorities. And this is the really, really hard one. If you take a team of 10 people and say, tell me the top 5 priorities for what you're working on. First of all, you won't get 5 from anybody because they'll all tell you, well, it's not really 5, there's 7 or 8. And there'll be some overlap. 2 or 3 of them will be the same on everybody's list. But there'll also be 2 or 3 that are unique to each person. And so you end up with a list pretty quickly of 10 to 15 priorities, which means you don't have any priorities. Right? 15 priorities means anything's a priority. So forcing yourself to say, no, we have to get it down to 5 real, meaningful priorities. How do we make that happen? How do we get that to happen and get the team aligned behind that? The biggest thing you have to do is you have to say no to a bunch of things. You have to give the team the freedom to decide that a bunch of stuff is not important. Some of it may need to get done eventually. Some of it may get done just because it gets done, but it's not important stuff. And get people focused on those 5 things. So when that was all done, we wrote this 3-page document. We published it to the team. The next layer of management took that and turned it into an 80-slide PowerPoint deck that was the more detailed version of the plan. And then the team turned it into, I don't know, 3,000 pages of specs for the project. So it was a project that was codenamed Xenon. It's a product you guys know as Xbox 360. And I will tell you, while that was a lot of hard work, and we had our bumps along the way for sure, that project was a joy. It was fun working hard on that project. The team came together on that project. And when you look at the numbers, it's undeniable that it was a better product. So our market share went from 20-some% to over 40% in most countries in the world. Even in Japan, we managed positive double-digit market share. That means 9.9% got to 10, but 10% market share in Japan. The business made billions of dollars and built an asset that is now itself worth billions of dollars. And I will tell you that 3-page document isn't the only reason that happened. Our friends at Sony provided us with lots of help. There were other things that the team did well. There were some things in the market that went our way. Online gaming became a phenomenon. Xbox Live was a massive success, and the Halo franchise, carried us a long way. So there's a lot of good things that happened. But I will tell you as a leader, that process of the 3P framework made a huge difference. And so what I do in the book is I talk about that entire process. How we came, what was wrong, and how we use the 3P framework to fix it. And I use that framework in the business consulting I do, I use it in the board work I do, and in particular I use it with the nonprofits I work with, because when it comes to strategy, that's not the first place they start. They start with the need of the people they're trying to serve, which is of course appropriate, but if you really want to be successful, you still have to have that strategy element. I'll come back to the second half of the book, because that's really the first half of the book. What I would say to you, in whatever you're doing, think about whether you can answer those questions. Can you write a 1-sentence North Star that says this is what we're trying to do? Can you do that for yourself personally? Can you write a 3P framework? I know this is goofy, but I have one for myself. Can you write a 3P framework for what you're doing in your life? How does work and family fit? How does your commitment to the community fit? How do you make all of that come together and happen? And are you intentional enough to write it, put it in a drawer for a little bit, and then 6 months later and come back and say, how am I doing? How does that fit in what I'm doing? And the same thing happens in a business. And I will tell you, there's a level of simplicity. None of this is in any business school book. There's no research on it. You won't find this framework on the internet anywhere. But I will tell you, in its simplicity, there's great power. And it changed that business. It's helped change a number of other things I've been involved with. And for me personally, I think it's given me the ability to make sure I'm having impact by making sure I'm focusing on the right thing. So I'm going to take a quick pause there before I talk about innovation. You guys have been very serious and respectful. Any questions about that whole process, about the project, what happened? Yeah. Yeah.
One, I'm curious why you left Microsoft.
Yep.
More specifically, did you burn out?
Yep.
The second.
The answer to that's no, but okay, go ahead.
Second, how did you track the efficacy of this?
Yep. Good question.
2,000 pages of specs.
Yeah. Good question.
And the third question I had is, you said people left.
Yeah.
Did you also let people go?
Yeah. So all good questions. So let me answer them in order, and I'll repeat them so people can hear them. First question was, why did I leave Microsoft, which is in parentheses was, did I burn out? The short answer to that is I left Microsoft because, not because I burned out. I have more energy and I'm more engaged in things now, maybe even than I was in the last 3 or 4 years at Microsoft. So I don't think of it that way at all. I had a real shift personally in where I wanted to have impact. And I'd worked professionally at Microsoft for 22 years. I helped build the Office business. I helped build this Xbox business. I felt like I'd done really good things in business. I learned a bunch, and I wanted to apply it in the world of civics and community engagement. And I wanted to have an impact in a different way. And I was trying to do that while I was working at Microsoft. And doing that while working at Microsoft and raising a family wasn't going to happen. And so I made the choice in 2010 to leave explicitly because there was things I wanted to do that had more deeper meaning for me at that stage of my life. And I've been pursuing those since. And it turned out one of those turned into writing the book. And I'll explain how that comes back to civic engagement in a minute. So that was your first question. Second question was, how do you track the 3P framework? So the 3P framework fits in the following way. Your purpose and principles aren't going to change very frequently. Your priorities, though, are the connection between the 3P framework and your annual operating plan. So when you get ready, and when does your fiscal year start? April. So in December, early January, you're starting to build that plan for the next year. And you would go and look at your 3P framework and say, all right, these were the 5 priorities we had last year. Are they the same for the next year? Our purpose is the same. Principles aren't going to change, but we're going to look at the priorities again. And we're going to say, okay, let's adjust them here. We'll move one out. We'll shift this one. Now we've got our new priorities. Then those priorities inform the team that's actually creating the operating plan. And that operating plan includes metrics, market share, budget performance, sales performance, people hiring, retention, all the things that you think of as part of operating a business. And so you use those as the metrics for success in what you're doing. Projects being on time would be one of those as well. Is the product prepared and coming and on time? And then at the end of the year, you come back and you look at those metrics, you go back to the priorities, and you say, how are we doing? Where do we have to adjust? Because we still have this North Star that we have to achieve. Now, at some point, that North Star could change. At some point, you could decide there's something in the marketplace that would require you to change that. But that's something that happens, hopefully every 3-4 years, not every 3-4 months. So that's how we tracked our success, is we took that, turned it into an operating plan, and then at the end of every year, and as the year goes on, you look at the operating plan and the metrics and figure out where it goes. And your third question was? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I said that people left when we went through the principles. Did we let people go? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. And we let people go. I'll sort of put them in 3 categories of people. There's a group of people, how do I say this well? When we started this project, there was a group of people who were incredibly enthusiastic, very core into gaming, and slightly crazy. And that energy was good at the beginning, but it didn't scale. And so those people left, and we asked a number of them to leave. Partly, and in part because some of the ways they expressed that energy just became inappropriate for a group our size. It just didn't work. And as you grow, you have those growing pains, and we set those people aside. Then there were some people who we knew just weren't on the bus. They didn't opt out. They still wanted to be part of the project, but they wanted to do it their way. And that doesn't work. And so we had to ask. Some of them left because they said, hey, this isn't working for me. I need to. Some of them we had to ask to leave. And then there's, always a few people you just look and say, they're not capable of doing the job we need them to do. Sort of a separate topic, wasn't really based on the 3P framework. That was sort of a performance-based thing. We had a period of pretty high churn after the first version of the product shipped, for all of those reasons. And then once we got on the road of Xenon, we had very little churn during that period of time. Once we got rolling, the team really did get rolling. Other questions? Yeah.
I actually worked at EA for a lot of your tenure. And
sure.
My question is, you were very dependent on third-party publishers.
You bet.
So this framework is really interesting, but then you're also very dependent on success of, besides Halo and a few of your games, you're very dependent on many other games. So how did that fit into the framework? And then how do you work that in when some of your dependencies are not?
Yeah, so basically, you're absolutely correct that we were dependent on third-party publishers. Electronic Arts being one, Activision being another, Take-Two. There's a bunch of them, let's say between 5 and 10 that we really cared a lot about. So how did that fit in the plan? Well, first of all, one of the priorities became make sure third parties win with on our platform. So consciously in the plan, we said third party and our relationship with third parties is one of the 5 priorities. And I literally dedicated a big chunk of my time. I spent a lot of time in that EA facility. I spent a lot of time with Don Matrick and Larry and John Riccatello and a bunch of other people, Jeff Brown. And so I know that team really well. And that was by design. It wasn't because I loved flying down to see them, although they're perfectly nice people, but it was because it mattered to the business. And so that became a real focus for what we had to accomplish. The other thing that you had is in the principles section, we realized that our success would only happen if our partners were successful. And so as an operating principle, making sure partners were successful was a big deal. And the team sort of got that figured out. And it created some tension because the Halo team didn't care about Electronic Arts. And so you had to manage that tension a bit, but clearly was an important priority. Anybody else? Yeah.
When your framework makes a mistake,
yeah.
thinking about supporting HDDVD,
yeah.
what happens then?
Okay, well, let me do 2 things. I want to talk about HDDVD because that turned out not to be a mistake. So it's absolutely true that having a 3P framework does not guarantee success. You could get the framework wrong and have a cataclysmic failure. If you have the wrong North Star, that's a problem. If you establish the wrong priorities, you might be nice that you have 5 of them, but if 4 of them are bad, you're not going to be successful. So I completely agree that there's no magic elixir in the framework itself. Take HDDVD as an example. Nested under one of our priorities was this discussion about what we did about entertainment and how we thought about entertainment. And we were at the cusp, if you can go back this far, Xbox 360 was at the cusp where Blu-ray was coming or high definition was coming, but it wasn't here yet, and it was going to be really expensive. And so our strategy actually was we wanted all that stuff to go online. We wanted Xbox Live to be successful with video. We actually, if we'd had our druthers, we would have done no video playback on the DVD player because it cost us money. We had to pay royalties every time we sold that product. And so that HDDVD Blu-ray for us was, hey, let's have a fight about that because the longer it stays murky, the more likely we are to be successful with it on Xbox Live. It would have been better for us if HDDVD had won because we had some play in those patents. It would have been less expensive for us ultimately to do it. But the ultimate victory of Blu-ray wasn't actually a big problem for us. And actually it hurt Sony because they included it in every unit of PS3, which meant their product was a lot more expensive than ours. And they were at about a $70 cost disadvantage to us for the entire life cycle. And as you guys know in the hardware business, $70 of cost is a giant boat anchor that you drag around behind you. It's really hard to make up for. Let me switch gears a bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation, then I want to talk about civics quickly. So for reasons that I sort of understand, people ask me to talk about innovation a lot, even though I am not an engineer. Okay, so we are not about to have an engineering discussion. But we are going to have an innovation discussion. And we had long conversations in the Xbox team about how we keep doing new things and how we keep innovation strong in the group. By this stage, by the time Xbox 360 shipped, we're 3,000 people, and it's getting harder and harder to keep things going. So we came up with this concept, which we called BXT. Microsoft, anybody who know Microsoft well, likes 3-letter acronyms. So BXT was a good thing for us to think about. BXT stands for Business, Experience, and Technology. And so what we concluded about innovation is that at Microsoft, it was often a technology thing. Somebody would do something cool in software, and then we'd have to try to go figure out what to do with it. And we decided we had that backwards. And that, in fact, what we should be thinking about is what's the customer need for new advances? How do we get that in the front, and then figure out how technology serves that need? And so we start with business. Let me give you what I think of the prototypical example of thinking about innovation as a business concept. So everybody in this room knows that Apple played a huge role in completely changing the music industry. Sort of ripped it apart and put it back together again, if we're all honest about it. And when I ask a group of people what Apple did to do that, the typical answer I get is iTunes. And what I would tell you is iTunes is a perfectly nice piece of software. It actually wasn't particularly innovative itself. It's now actually maybe not even the best piece of software Apple has. And so I don't think iTunes was the thing that was innovative. The thing that was innovative was a business concept called 99-cent songs. 99-cent song is what ripped the music industry apart. Because until that point, you had to sell what my generation would call an album, what the next generation would call a CD, and what now they don't even call it anything. It's a collection. And so that was $15 to $20 with 10 to 15 songs on it, 9 to 14 of which you did not want. And that business model led people to steal music. Once it became possible to pirate music, if the logic went, well, I only want one of the songs, why should I pay for the whole thing? Yeah, I know it's stealing, but it's not, it's nothing, it's one song. So I'm gonna take it. And that's what people did. And pretty soon people's pirated collection was way bigger than their CD collection. And the music industry was scratching its head saying, oh, we have a huge problem. And it wasn't even, they had a copy protection problem, but that wasn't even really the problem. The problem they had was a customer problem. They were delivering a value in bundled music that the customer did not want. And Apple saw a 99-cent song as a way to break through that. And oh, by the way, it was great for the iPod. And oh, by the way, when we deliver this iTunes product and then we can sell the music, well, now that's a whole nother business. And iTunes is still today a $3.5, $4 billion business, even in the world of subscriptions. And so 99-cent song is a business innovation. So when you're thinking about the things that you're doing, I mean, I looked at all the products Logitech in categories you're in, and you're in a lot of different products, which is really exciting. Think about ways in which that can be a business innovation, not just a technical breakthrough. Are there ways in which you can fundamentally change the way people think about the business? And can you innovate? I will tell you, those business innovations are way more disruptive and way more advantageous to the person who makes them than the technical innovations. Technical innovations can be chased, people can catch up, people can replicate. When you're responsible for a business innovation, the money comes to you. Apple generated this incredible stream of money, which started with 99-cent songs and went to iPod hardware, went to iTunes retailing, which went to iTouch, which went to iPhone, which went to the Apple Store. And you can draw a direct line from 99-cent songs to the iPhone and the Apple Store. And it's stunning. Now, give them huge credit. They did amazing work, a lot of it technical, along the way to make that happen. But the essence of where much of that started was with a 99-cent song. So that's the B of innovation. Now let's talk about X. Now, I said that X stands for experience. Yes, experience begins with an E. But BET is an entertainment network, so that didn't work. And this was the Xbox team, so we said experience is going to begin with an X. So we got X. So what do I mean by experience? If you can remember, the first time you got an iPhone and you did the little swipe, which now today is just like, oh, so what? When you first did it, you almost fell out of your chair. Like, oh my God, that's the coolest thing ever. And just imagine what that was and what that's about. That's a visceral experience that touches you in a way and you go, oh, this is cool, I have to have this product. Let me give you the two more current examples. The first of these is Uber. So what is Uber? It's a taxi company. And I don't mean that with disrespect. They've done great work. It's an amazing company. But it's a taxi company. What was the insight that made Uber successful? It wasn't using GPS information. That was a fine thing. It was that the taxi cab process sucked for customers. Awful. So if you're getting a taxi in New York in November, right, it's sleeting, there are no taxis, and you're standing out on the street with your hand on, like this, trying to flag down a taxi. And if you should have the temerity to call for a taxi, they say, hey, hello, you're on hold for 20 minutes. And then if the taxi driver who's supposed to come pick you up sees somebody else flagging him down in the meantime, he or she picks them up and your taxi goes away. The taxi business had no customer experience at all. In fact, the only customer experience it had was bad. So what Uber's insight is, okay, we're going to make this an awesome customer experience. And so everything else they did was about making that experience great, both for you and, as it turned out, for the taxi driver. And they changed the industry. And overnight, over 4 or 5 years. And you now have entire, whole new sets of laws that are having to be written, and whole new government regulation processes, and whole new sets of things in Europe and in all these other countries to deal with the fact that the taxi experience is now good. It's a powerful statement of what experience can do. Another small example, again, from my Sonos days and my Sonos work. So Amazon comes out with a product called the Echo. All right, the Echo is, I'd say this even in front of an Amazon audience, a mediocre speaker. It doesn't produce fabulous sound. But what's the experience thing it does produce? It's come in, talk to it, and say, play this, and a high percentage of the time it plays it. Right? Now compare that, and I'll say this to iTunes or to the Sonos controller or to a specific song on Spotify. It's get out your phone, fire up the app, 7 steps later, you play the song. It's an experience difference. Now the challenge for Echo is the voice experience has to work, 6 nines of the time, not 1.5 nines of the time. But nevertheless, they sold, 3.5, 4 million speakers in one holiday. It's stunning. It's a huge deal. And they have big plans for that whole category, and the speaker part will become less and less important. And the voice part is going to become more and more important. They want to go take down Siri because they think they can produce a home automation customer experience that allows you to talk to your home. That's a powerful experience-driven innovation. So that's the X, B, and X. T is about technology. And I could use a lot of examples here. I'm going to pick Google because I had some tangential engagement with them. I used to run a business called Encarta. Anybody remember Encarta? Encarta was an amazing encyclopedia. Probably the world's best encyclopedia. It had more data than World Book, more data than Britannica. It had images and pictures. It danced, it sang. It did all kinds of crazy things off a DVD or two and was an amazing product. Google came out with an algorithm that helped you sort the internet, and the Encarta business was gone in 12 months. And that's the power of, and the Google interface wasn't very good. It was still messy. Sometimes you got the links you want, sometimes you didn't. It was really slow because broadband wasn't completely here yet. And their page was boring because they wanted it to paint fast. And if they put an image on it, it would be really slow on the internet. But it didn't matter because suddenly you had the world at your fingertips. And that was a different space. Hence the phrase, if it's on the internet, it must be true. There is no editor in that world. So what you lost is editorial quality. And it turned out people didn't care. And that didn't matter. And what mattered was being able to get access to the information you wanted easily. And that's the power of a pure technical innovation. There are times when it takes you to a new level that is different. The companies that are truly successful and the products that are truly successful do B, X, and T. It's no mistake that the examples I used are all, well, in Apple's case, I focused on the B, but they did a lot of good X and T work in that linear line of success that I talked about. It turns out the Uber guys are pretty good technically. And they did a lot of good software and some good cloud-based work to make that work. And it turns out, actually, the Google folks had a business innovation called ad-based search that was super powerful, made them, a gazillion dollars. So when you're thinking about innovation, think about how you can do it in the B and the X and the T in whatever you're doing. And when you combine that with a strategy, if you have a strategy and you have a model for innovation that is broad-based enough to think about all aspects of the business, your chances of success in whatever you're doing are dramatically higher. Not guaranteed, but dramatically higher. And in the game we play, it's all about improving the odds because there's no sure thing. Sony would say, oh, PS3 was a sure thing. Turned out not to be a great business for them. Microsoft would have said Xbox One, the latest release, sure thing. Turns out, an okay business, not as good as they thought, because it's not a sure thing. But if you have a strong strategy and you have a strong framework for how to think about innovation, you really do stack the deck more in your favor. So pause quickly there, and then I want to finish up with talking about how this all applies to civics and other things I'm doing. Any comments, questions about that? Okay. Let me talk about something that has nothing to do with your work here at Logitech. So in the second half of my book, I take that 3P framework I talked about and I apply it to civics. I apply it to government institutions. I apply it to nonprofits. I apply it to the world outside our business lives. Ask the question, what would happen if we wrote a 3P framework for the United States? And in fact, in the book, I write a 3P framework for the United States, as crazy as that is. And I submit it is crazy, and I'm not qualified, but that's okay. It doesn't seem to matter in politics these days, so it's okay. We all get a little extra degrees of freedom, it seems. My point in doing that was not that I'm right in what I wrote as the 3P framework for our country. But my point in doing it was to point out that it needs to be thought that way, and that we need to look at the things that are going on in our communities, in our civic organizations, in the government we work with, whether it's local, state, or federal. We need to think about them in a disciplined, strategic way. And every one of us has to decide how we're going to engage in that process. And every one of us has to step back and say, okay, if I'm going to be involved in my community, how am I going to be involved? If I'm going to work with a nonprofit, am I going to help them think about things at a strategy level? Am I going to help them get organized in a way that aligns them for success? Think about the conversation we had about BXT and pick any civic problem you have in the community and ask yourself, could we apply the BXT framework to that civic problem? And would things be better? I live in Seattle. Seattle has challenging geography and a lot of lakes and water, and perhaps one of the most screwed up transportation systems you could possibly imagine. And getting worse. Oh, by the way, we have a population explosion. And getting worse. And our government in Seattle spent 10 years deciding how to replace a bridge that was already 10 years past its useful life and had to be serviced every summer so it didn't sink. That's not the way government's supposed to work. It's not the way civic organizations are supposed to work. Seattle has a homelessness problem. It's very sad. And government tries to do a few things. There's some nonprofits that do a few things. There's some companies that care. But no group of businesses, government, and nonprofits have come together concretely to tackle the problem with a strategy that people can understand and with a set of new tools and innovative approaches that can change the dynamic of what's happening to these people in our community. So I will submit that Washington, D.C. is a very strange place and is highly screwed up. I'm happy to have that conversation with any of you if you'd like. If you'd like to challenge that assumption, we can have that discussion. And that's sad and something that we have to work on. But your local communities are things you can work on. Things you can dedicate time in your own 3P framework to say, hey, that's going to be one of my priorities. And I'm going to take the tools that I've learned at work and I'm going to apply them in a logical way. And I'm going to think about how all the innovation work that I leave down here in Newark and how I don't leave it here and how I take the concepts and the ideas and the way I think about things and apply that back to the things that are going on in my community. I'm a sort of a, I'm an emotional patriot when it comes to our country. I really am. I care a lot about our country. My dad fought in World War II. My parents were of a generation of people that grew up in the Depression, survived that, helped build what I think of as a really great country. Some of you are citizens, some of you aren't, but you live here and you work here. And I'm saddened a lot. I read the news and what's going on in the news today, and it saddens me on so many fronts. It's a very, very challenging time. And the only way that's going to change, it's not going to change based on what happens in the election. It could get worse based on what happens in the election, but it's probably not going to get better. But the way it's going to change is when people like you decide that the time has come for it to change. And you can do that locally. You can do that. You can decide to get involved in politics if you want, but you don't have to. You can pick a cause, you can pick a charity, you can pick an agency, you can volunteer, you can serve on a committee. There are lots of ways in which you can be civically involved and make a difference. And the challenge we face is we have to do this in mass. Can't do a few small things. People have to stand up and decide that enough's enough and we're going to change things. And we're going to do it in a productive, cooperative, conciliatory way. I'm a big believer in what's called collective action, which is the idea that if you get a business interest, you get government interest, you get nonprofit interest, and you focus them on one problem, that problem can go away and go away quickly. And we can have a huge impact in our community. And so the second half of my book is about that. It's about how you take, how I am trying now to take what I learned at Microsoft and apply it to what I call civic engineering. And the idea that we can re-engineer the way our communities work and re-engineer them in a very, very positive way. It takes a lot of work, it takes effort, and it takes effort beyond your family and beyond your business life. So that's hard. But if we don't stand up and do that, things aren't going to get better. And things, unfortunately, in almost every community in the country, there are deep, deep problems that we have to address. So we were on such a rising, shining note until I got to that topic. But it's something I really believe in passionately. And the 3P framework and the BXT innovation work are things that I'm now trying to apply in making that happen. So, question, yeah?
Are you finding that it's better to work on this civic engineering from a civilian perspective or from an elected political perspective?
That's a good question. I would tell you that that's a personal question. I mean, I think there's a woman, Susan Del Bene, used to work for me. You guys probably don't know Susan. She ran marketing for Microsoft Mobile Business. Very smart. Her husband's at Microsoft as well. He's still there. Susan is my congresswoman. She left Microsoft and decided to run for Congress, and she will win re-election pretty easily. She's my third-term congresswoman. Now, the truth is, I don't actually agree with at least half of what Susan thinks. But the fact is, I vote for her and have financially supported her because I think she's really smart. And I think she cares. I think she's trying to do the right thing, and she will work with other people. So she's taken the road of getting involved personally. I've taken the road of trying to provide tools and a platform and trying to help people and try to motivate people to get there. And I think both are necessary, and all of it depends. And a lot of my work is actually in the nonprofit space, not in the government space. I'm very involved in Boys and Girls Clubs of America. I'm very involved in an organization called Year Up, which does really cool job training for kids who have high school diplomas but aren't going to get to college. And so I'm trying to have my impact in that space. But Susan's making a difference in a different way. Being a congresswoman or a congressman, it's the most difficult political job in the country. You have an election every 2 years with a district that is strung out over a crazy geography. It's really hard. And she's doing great work, and I give her a lot of credit. And there's a lot of people like that. We just need more of them. Any other questions? I sense a donut in my future. Anybody else? Let me end by saying thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. I hope there's something you take away from the last hour. I competed with you for, well, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. There's some friends who are good friends of mine that would be shocked and stunned that I was speaking at Logitech. The folks in the mouse and keyboard group are rolling over in their grave. I will say this. We had a lot of competitors in that business. Logitech was the one company we respected and feared. The other guys, we didn't respect their engineering, frankly, and we didn't fear them in the marketplace. Logitech did good engineering work, and you were good in the marketplace. You guys have a great company here, and you should be proud of it, and I hope it continues to have great success. Thanks very much.
I hope you enjoyed it. It's good. Thank you for the question. Well, I just spoke to GoPro about 2 months ago.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wish I had it.
Oh, yeah.
That was actually why.
That's cool.
Yeah, I remember when you left.